Irish Breakdown Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's been a minute since Bryan and I had a show for you guys. It was a couple Fridays ago when we did a mailbag before he went on vacation, but we are back. It is Tuesday, March 11th, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about star power, and we're going to be talking about what that means in the grand scheme of college football. Does Notre Dame have it? You know, you look at past champions. Did they have it? What did they have in terms of star power? And then Bryan and I are going to separate that out between offense and defense. And we sorted it kind of into four buckets. We started out with some of the proven players. We have players we're going to talk about that are on the verge. They're very close. And pretty quickly into 2025, we're going to start to see some of those filter up into the proven category. We have some players that are very capable of doing it. We just have to see a little bit more of a sample size. And then there's players that we're going to keep our eye on really throughout the majority of 2025. Those are the players with the really high ceilings. And can they have a year like, not a lot of people expected a lot of Mitchell Evans in 2023 to have the impact over that stretch of time that he did. Does somebody step up into that role? And we're going to break that down on offense and defense. And we are going to end the show today with a mailbag. There's a lot of time that we're going to be rolling with this show today. A lot of good topics of conversation. So as we're going, be sure to get your questions in, your comments, and anything that you want Bryan and I to cover at the end of the show today. In order to do that, you put a little mailbox emoji or you put MB for mailbag, and we'll be sure to get those started and get those answered at the end of the show today. And as always, the best way to get your question bumped up to the top is you always can throw in a super chat. But today, Mr. Driscoll, glad to have you back on the show. This is the first one we've done together in a while. I'm excited to dive into talking about star power here with you today, man.
Did you miss me?
I did, man.
I on the show with you.
It was cool. I'm not gonna lie. Like being in the, I guess Salty Virginia Peanuts likes to call it the power seat for an entire week. I was like, all right. I was like going back through and like watching old episodes. I was like, all right, this is how Bryan would transition this. I'm gonna make sure that this is good to go. But it was a good week. Sean Davis and I ripped through a lot of shows. Had a lot of fun with Bill Bender. But now we're back to the duo that we started the 2024 season with. So,
well, you did a great job last week. I was able to enjoy myself a little bit more knowing that you had it. You were in control of things, so I appreciate that very much. It's of course was much needed, but I am, like you said, I'm excited to be back. We were still texting during the trip about obviously things that needed to get done. You did a great job of doing that, so I'm happy to be back, and I'm ready to be back. Ready to talk Notre Dame football, Trev, because, I mean, gosh, spring's 8 days away, right? I mean, a week and a day, right? I mean, next Wednesday is when they get started on spring practice, and it's going to be a very interesting spring. We're still in new territory in a lot of ways, Trev. It's in the past spring, your season's over January 1st or 2nd at the latest. You don't start until 3 months later, and you're 2 months later, sometimes close to 3 months later, and you don't really know where you're going to be. And so the spring practice is kind of getting acclimated. Well, these guys are, less than 2 months. Like if your season's over March 1st and then you start practice, or January 1st and you start practice mid to late March, you got a lot of time off. Whereas Notre Dame missed 3 weeks of potential practice time or off-season time that they would have otherwise had because they went on the title run. So how do you handle that, right? Those are all types of things that we're going to learn about this off-season. But, there's so much to discuss when you talk about how this team is going to be. And those are questions that you guys have. Throw those in the mailbag. I'm excited about it. So I'm looking forward to answer some of your questions today because we're just going to focus on the star power question at the beginning and then dive into, the mailbag at the end and find out what you guys think. But the one thing that we do know, Trev, with all the uncertainty of the new playoff format and how does that impact the offseason and how is Notre Dame going to handle the offseason and this and that and the other, the one thing that is for sure is that to be a championship caliber football team, you need star power. And it's not the same positions for every team. Some teams have dominated because they had star power quarterback. That was not true really from 2021 to 2023. And I would even argue 2024 because Will Howard was better in that system than I thought he was going to be. I wouldn't call him a star by any stretch. I think he benefited from having stars around him, and he managed the offense incredibly well. He did a great job in the postseason. But would I call him a star? No, I wouldn't call him a star. I would argue that the last quote unquote star of college football at quarterback was that won a title was 2020 with Mac Jones. And that was a stretch of years where you had star power, 19 Joe Burrow, 18 Trevor Lawrence, but then 17, with Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa, they weren't stars then. Tua became one in college. Jalen became one in college. Jalen is, I would argue, has kind of become one in the pros, at least a winner, right? I mean, the kid just won a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I'm not an NFL guy, Trev, but I got to say, I as much I hate the Eagles, mainly because of their fans, and I despise their head coach. I'm not a big fan of the Siriannis, but man, I love Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts. It's just as guys.
Oh, yeah.
And to watch them get those rings was a lot of fun to watch. Sidetrack. 2016, Deshaun Watson, star. 2015, Jacob Coker, no. 2014, Cardell Jones, no. 2013, Jameis Winston, yes. 2012, AJ, and 11, AJ McCarron, no. 2010, Cam Newton, yeah. Duh, right? 2009, Greg McElroy, no. 2008, Tim Tebow, yes. So you go over the years, and there have been years where they didn't have star power quarterback. You had to have some level of good quarterback play. So it varies position to position. There's years where teams have star receivers. Ohio State had two star wide receivers. You could, if you really want to, you could argue they have 3-star talents at wide receiver, even only really 2 of them played like stars, production-wise. But Cardinal Tate's a star talent, and when he needed to be a star, he stepped up and played like one. Michigan in 2023, you're going to argue that Roman Wilson was a star? Colson Loveland's a very good player at tight end, but he's not. I wouldn't put him in the same category as like a Brock Bowers or a Michael Mayer from a production and dominance standpoint.
No.
So it varies from year to year, Trev, and where that star power is from team to team. And it really comes down to what are the things that we do see as trends. You have to have star power, and you need star power at positions that fuel what you do well. So if you're a team that dominates with defensive play, front seven's got to have some star power in it. That's what Georgia used in 21 and 22 on defense. It's just star power in the front seven. And other teams, Clemson and their great runs, that star power receiver, star power quarterback, star power in the D-line. That was where most of their star power was. Now, their 2018 team, which I think was better than their 2016 team, had more star power in more positions, which is what made them so good. They had it at running back. They had it at receiver. They had it at quarterback. They had it on the D-line. They had it at linebacker with Isaiah Simmons. I would argue that I don't know that A.J. Terrell or Trayvon Mullen were necessarily stars individually, but as a duo, they were terrific. And you could say they were a star duo. They complement each other very well.
Yeah.
So there are some teams that have it in more places. Alabama in 2020 had it at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, secondary, but they didn't necessarily have it on the D-line that year the way that they have in past years. So it varies from team to team, but it's got to be about what you're trying to be good at. And so that's where you could look at in past years. What made Michigan so good? Running the football, stopping the run, being elite on defense, and being that kind of team, right? So did they have a star quarterback? No, I don't think so. Did they have a star running back? That's debatable, because I think when Blake Corum was healthy, he was really good. And he played like a star in the national title game. I mean, you can't dispute that. And he made some big time plays in the in the semifinal game against Alabama, had over 100 yards of offense. Didn't have a star at receiver, didn't have a star running backs. Michael Parks, Connor Stallions.
I saw that.
That's great. That's great. But very well done. Very well done. But, you saw guys step up and play like stars in those big moments. Donovan Edwards was not a star for Michigan in 2023, but he certainly looked like one against Ohio State, right? And was it 20? Actually, no, he had his big game against Ohio State in 22. So, but the quarterback was not a star, but he played like one at certain moments. But defensively is where they had their stars, right? That's one thing that we can agree on is they had their stars on defense. You had Mason Graham. You had Jalen Harrell at times look like one. You're talking the secondary with Will Johnson on the back end of the defense. And so, they had their star power that year. You had one of the best slot corners in all of college football, and Mike Sanders still. So they weren't a team loaded with stars, but they had really good football players everywhere. and they had enough star power on both sides of the ball to step up, or they had guys that stepped up and played like stars in key moments. We could argue that Blake Corum wasn't a star in 23 because he wasn't the same player as he was in 22 before the knee injury. That's a fair conversation to have. But look at when he was at his best in 23. It was against Bama and Washington. And that to me is where you say, okay, there was some star power there with him. And so those are different things you look at, Trev, and you evaluate when you're breaking it down. He played like a star in the win over Michigan of Penn State. Didn't complete a pass in the second half. What did they do in that game? Just rode Blake Corum the entire second half. So the point is, you need star power. You go to 2022. You look at that Georgia team in 2022. That team absolutely had star power. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, you look at that 2022 team. On offense, you look at your pass game. You had Brock Bowers, one of the best stars in college football. Ladd McConkey had star talent, although he wasn't. Yeah, he was a little banged up that year, but look what he did in the title game: 5 catches for 88 yards, 2 touchdowns. Had 5 for 69 in the touchdown against LSU in the SEC title game. So, he had his moments where he stepped up and played like a star. But you had Brock Bowers in that offense, and he was absolutely a star. Defensively, you certainly had a lot of stars, especially in 2021. I mean, the 2021 team especially, I mean, you had Jalen Carter and Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith. You certainly had plenty of it there. 2022, Jalen Carter was a dude. I mean, he was a dude. He wasn't as dominant as he was in 2021 because of some injury issues, but he was still a dude. You had plenty of star talent, star power on that team. You go back 2020, the Alabama team, we talked about it. Mac Jones, Devontae Smith, Najee Harris. They have plenty of it there. It's there. We could spend the next hour going through examples of teams that have star power, Trev, but I think it's even more important now. That's something that I want to argue is it's always been important to win a title. I think it's more important now if you're going to make a run. And it's got to be, and when we say it's not just have a guy. And so I would look back at the 2024 season for Notre Dame and say on offense, did Notre Dame have a lot of star power, like a guy that just from start to finish will start? I had one, in my opinion. I had one guy that really from the first game of the year to the last game of the year, you could say that guy was a star. He was an elite talent. But that guy didn't do a whole lot in the playoffs because he was injured and because other teams focused on it. So you needed other guys to step up, and at different times, different guys stepped up. But he also stepped up when he needed to. When you look at that first playoff game against Indiana, and showed that's a dude right there. I mean, that was a complete game changer, that play by Jeremiah Love. But after that, what's the big play that Jeremiah Love had in the postseason? It was 9, 10, 11-yard runs here and there. But teams focus so much on him, you say, okay, somebody else got to step up. So, Jordan Faison did in the first game. Riley Leonard did in the second game. Jaden Greathouse did in the third game. And then, and the fourth game. But the point is, Trev, is you need star power, and it's got to be more than one. Because as we saw in the postseason, when teams took Jeremiah Love in the run game out, it took Notre Dame a while to kind of get their offense going. Where, with Ohio State, so you put your resources towards stopping Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, and then you're going to say, what are you going to do? Just go play man coverage for 95% of the game against Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Buka, and Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis. Like, okay, good luck with that. There aren't a lot of teams that can do that. And okay, we're gonna really make sure we're gonna play a lot of zone and double team Jeremiah Smith, and that's our game plan. And good luck stopping the run game. And like you look at the Texas game, I thought Texas did a brilliant job of slowing down the Ohio State pass game. Yeah. What broke that game open? Travion Henderson taking a screen pass 75 yards for a touchdown. That star power. And you need it on both sides of the ball to win a championship, unless one side of your team is so exceptionally dominant that it doesn't really matter. And we've seen that a little bit. I would argue that was the case with LSU in 2019. But even then, K'Lavon Chasen was not a bum. Patrick Queen was a first-round draft pick. I mean, their defense wasn't great, but they still had some dudes on that team, Trev, that were outstanding players that you could argue were star players, even though their defense wasn't a star. Yeah. Well, why does that matter? Even if your defense isn't necessarily great, you still need to have those guys that can step up and have those moments. and make those plays. And we certainly saw that from the LSU defense, even though they weren't necessarily a team that was, how do I say this? They didn't play elite defense that year, but they didn't have to. They played great complementary defense that year to one of the best offenses we've ever seen. And part of that was you had a couple guys you could just kind of lean on that team. So the point is, Trev, is that's always been needed. But now to win 4 games, which is what Notre Dame needs to do, you have to be able to – you have to have star power. You need it in – you need more of it, in my opinion, than what they had in 2024. No doubt they had stars in 2024. And we could argue that had some of those stars not gotten injured, maybe we're having a different conversation. And that's very true. I'm looking at what they had the last 2 rounds.
Yeah.
You had basically, in my opinion, 2 true stars on those 2 teams, in my opinion. Jeremiah Love, Xavier Watts. You want to argue for anybody else, we can have that. But that's because you didn't have a Riley Mills. You didn't have a Boubacar, who maybe he becomes a star by the end of the year. Riley was playing like one. From Louisville till the time he got hurt against Indiana, Riley Mills was playing like a star. Riley Leonard had his moments here and there. Jadarian Price had some moments here and there. Jaden Greathouse certainly had moments in the last 2 games, but you didn't have those other guys that were take over a game guys outside of Xavier and Jeremiah Love. As we saw, that wasn't enough to win a championship. It was enough to get you to the title game, but it wasn't enough to win a championship. And as much as Notre Dame battled in that game and played with such great heart, they still lost by 11 and were still down by 24 in the second half. And there's a reason for that. So the reality is to get to that next level, there needs to be an upgrade in star power for Notre Dame. Now, part of that's you need some luck and you need to stay healthy. And as we've said, Trev, I think Notre Dame's a different-looking football team if Mitchell Evans is 100%, if Jeremiah Love's healthy in the playoffs, if Boubacar Traore's healthy, if Riley Mills is healthy. They would have had another star player if he doesn't go down at corner, and Benjamin Morrison, he was a star. We'll discuss Leonard more when we get to the defensive section about whether he was or wasn't. We'll have that conversation. But they certainly had one in Benjamin Morrison. And when you lose those kind of guys, it's hard for just somebody to come and become a star right in the middle of the season. Kind of saw it a little bit with Leonard Moore, which we'll talk about later, but that's the reality of it, Travis. Ohio State had more star power than Notre Dame did. And they had it at more positions than Notre Dame did as well. Yeah. It wasn't just they were all at receiver and running back. I saw that on the secondary as well. But that's kind of where I'm at with this discussion, Trevor, is there's no doubt to win 4 games, you need star power. We've seen it throughout history. I think it's self-explanatory in a lot of ways, but you're going to face teams when you've got to win 4 games. You're going to face teams that are good enough to take away certain parts of your team away. And if all your star power is in one position, then and you're playing a team that's really good at stopping that one thing, and you don't have anything else to go to, that's how you get knocked out of the postseason. Look at Penn State. They got star power at running back, and in the first half, you saw it. They got star power at tight end, star power at running back. Second half of the game, Notre Dame was able to limit both of those a little bit. And you needed, hey, we need somebody at receiver to step up and help us out. Nothing. They had Abdul Carter at defensive line, had a couple guys on the defensive line, but Notre Dame was able to neutralize that. They didn't have any star power in the second or third level. Notre Dame took advantage of that in the second half. Right. And so that's where I look at it and say, when you play teams in the really good teams in the postseason, you need star power. What was Georgia lacking this year compared to previous teams? Star power.
Yeah.
They were really good in certain spots, but they didn't have – who was their star on offense? Who's that guy that could take a game over for them on offense the way Brock Bowers could? They didn't have that guy. So when they play a team like Notre Dame, who just as a unit, their defense is better than their offense, there wasn't that one mismatch or that one dominant player that could really light things up the way that Brock Bowers could in past years.
Or draw enough attention away for somebody else to emerge.
Bingo.
Like
a Lad McConkey. Exactly. It's a great point. So, Trev, that's where I'm at is to win 4 games, you need star power, but I would argue that Notre Dame needs more of it now than they have in the past. And they need it to be more balanced across the roster than it has been. And that's sort of that next step. And so that's my argument for why we're having this conversation. it's fun to have a star power talk, but this isn't just about, hey, let's have a fun Tuesday afternoon talk about star power. It is going to be that because I'm excited to talk about this topic, but it's also very important for Notre Dame to become that championship winning team. They have enough star power to be a championship contender. We just saw that. We've seen them make the playoffs before, but it needs to go to another level for them to kind of kick down that door and finally get that first title since 1988.
You and I are in the same boat there. When we talk about star power, a lot of people can kind of confuse that. They draw a lot of attention from national media. It's like, well, so-and-so said that this player is a star. They're always on the cover of this, and they're always on, the topic of this podcast, et cetera, et cetera. To me, and you brought up two of these points while we were sitting around game planning for the show. And it was, for you to be a star, one, you affect the opposing team's game plan week in and week out. There's somebody that when you get the scouting report on a Sunday or a Monday, it's number 4 in blue and gold is that dude. Number 2 is everything that you just talked about is the impact in the postseason. Are you able to draw enough attention away like Jeremiah Love did for a Jaden Greathouse to emerge and go off in those games? Or for a Brock Bowers to draw all the attention away in the secondary, has to get double teamed every time Lad McConkey has a great season. You go through and you think about some of the past Alabama teams where O.J. Howard had those random playoff games where he went off. Well, it's because he was on teams with guys like Derrick Henry and Calvin Ridley and players like that. The final one for me is you go through and you think about star power, and it's the players when they do perform well, it's not a surprise. Like when I go through and I think about Jaden Greathouse's 2 games in the national championship, was I surprised from a skill set standpoint? No, I wasn't, because I knew he was capable of doing that. But was I surprised to actually see it happen?
It was more finally, as opposed to where did that come from? It wasn't Timmy Smith in the Super Bowl against the Broncos. Like, who's Timmy Smith? I didn't even know they had a guy named Timmy Smith on their team. It's not that, Trev. Like, it's more of, well, finally they're making him a focal point of the offense. Because how many times did you and I say leading up to that game, meaning weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that look, when this guy gets the ball, he does damage. Get him the ball more. Yeah, so that's a great point. It wasn't like, wow, I didn't think Jaden Greathouse had that in him. And whereas if like I don't even want to say a name, but like, yeah, there's other times where it's like if that guy would have stepped up and gone off in that type of environment, like, wow, I didn't know that guy had it in him. I love Jaden Thomas, so I'll say this, but like if Jaden Thomas would have gone out and had 5 catches for 130 yards in the playoffs, I'd be like, wow, I did not see that coming. I did not know he had that in him. And I love the kid. He was an incredibly valuable member of this football team. There's a reason Notre Dame designed several 3rd and 4th big 4th down plays to go to him in a literally an ISO route where it's either he's getting the ball or it's just not going to work.
Absolutely.
But he's not a star. He's not a game changer. He's not a guy that takes over a football game. So if he'd have done it, you'd be like, wow. Where, like, to your point, when Greathouse does it, you're like, it's about freaking time. You know what I mean? So yes, that's a great point, Trev. Great point.
Yeah, for me, when you're talking about stars, they're the players that at the end of the game, when you go back and you do the recap of how they performed, it wasn't like a, oh my goodness, it was a, yeah, duh. Going back through all of the star power performances, it's like, man, Jeremiah Love had a great run against Indiana. It's like, yeah, have you watched the last 12 games? That shouldn't be a surprise. Like when you talk about
ripped off. Yeah.
It's like, did you see him outrun everybody? Week. Yes, I have. I've watched him do it 13 times this season. I don't know about you, but that to me, in addition to all the things that you listed off, that's what star power is to me, just from the eye test. As you go and you sit back, it's like, yeah, no duh, that guy goes off. And you can see it in the past history of all of the players that we had just spent naming off.
And sometimes, to your point, Trev, star power isn't about you going off. It's the attention that the other team has to pay to you. Results in other people making big plays. And that's kind of how a lot of times, like when I watched Georgia in 2021 and 2022, it was kind of like, Brock Bowers maybe didn't do a lot of damage in that particular game, but you watched how much the other team focused on him. You kind of understood that because they were just spending so much time trying to stop him, and that opened up opportunities for other players. I mean, you look at the title game in 2021 at the end of the 21 season when they beat Alabama. Brock Bowers had 4 catches for 36 yards. That's it. But part of the reason that Georgia won that game is because of that. Yeah, George Pickens had 1 catch for 52 yards against solo coverage. A.D. Mitchell had 2 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown, partly because he was getting one-on-one. And then your 2 running backs combined for 161 yards and a touchdown on only 19 carries because the defense was so set on stopping Brock Bowers that it opened up some of those other opportunities. And we've seen that before as well. I think, I love to bring up Broncos references, but I think of the Super Bowl and against the Falcons and why that play action worked to Rod Smith was because they were so focused. First down, you're running the ball to Terrell Davis, of course. So those safeties are going to come flying down on first down when they see, run action. Denver saw that, and they knew they could take advantage of Eugene Robinson, and they were designing a big play to Rod Smith. So it was Terrell Davis's presence that opened up that opportunity. And you see that all the time. And so it sometimes being a star isn't just about, hey, you put up numbers, but did you take over a game? Did you impact the game in a big way? But as you said, I love the point you made, Trev. Impact the game isn't always what you do. It's what your presence does for your teammates. There were games that Lewis Nix in 2012 would have a great game and he'd finish with 2 tackles, no tackles for loss. But you're like, Manti was running free all game downhill because he was dominating at the point of attack.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not always about your production. Sometimes it's your dominance is creating opportunities for other people. And that's part of being a star player as well. But it all focuses around you're so dominant that you force the other team to really build their game plan around trying to stop you. Mm-hmm. And keep you from doing what you do, which is why I think to some degree you could kind of put Riley Leonard in that conversation for 2024 because teams spent so much time trying to game plan to stop him that I do think it opened up some other opportunities. That's a debatable thing that a debate we could have. Don't care to have it right now because it's looking backwards. I want to talk about what's going forward. Yeah. But whether you think Riley Leonard was a star or not, what you can say is how teams game plan to him did at times create opportunities for other players to make big plays. And that's one of those criteria for being a star. But then also being a star is at times you are taking games over, especially big games. And so, yeah, we could go back and talk about Brock Bowers and, he really didn't do a whole lot in the title game and he didn't really do anything against Alabama, but you look at other games that season, you're like, yeah, but did you see him against so-and-so? And did you see him against so-and-so? And did you see how dominant he was in this other game that he had? And did you see how dominant he was in this other game that he had? And, those are things that stand out to me. It's like, okay, he didn't dominate against Alabama for the reasons that we discussed. But did you see what he did against Alabama in the semifinal game? Well, the SEC title game? Why did Alabama spend so much time trying to stop him? Because he had 10 catches for 139 yards and a touchdown against Bama in the SEC title game. Yeah. Because he had 3 catches for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns against Georgia Tech. So you look at him and you say, how did he play in the game against number 11 Kentucky? 5 catches, 101 yards, 2 touchdowns. How did he play at ranked Auburn? 2 catches, 43 yards. Those are the things you look at and say, okay, that's why teams focus so much attention on him is because he was such a dominant player in those big moments and in those big games. And that's what made him a special player. I mean, and then of course his so would it be sophomore year, 2022? He was pretty dominant in all the postseason games. 6 for 81 and a touchdown against LSU in the SEC title game, 4 for 64 against Ohio State in the semifinals, and then 7 for 152 and a touchdown against TCU in the title game. So there are times when you're the focal point of the defense, and that creates opportunities for others. But then there's also opportunities where you are also stepping up and making big plays and having those big money games. So that's what star power is. And it's offensively, it's defensively, it's all around. And I don't know that you can point to a team that didn't have some level of star power, usually on both sides of the ball. And that's what Notre Dame is going to need to have. So the question is going to be, and what we're going to address here the rest of the show, Trevor, is do they have star power? Yes. We'll discuss it. Do they have enough star power to compete for a title? That's more to be determined. And we're going to have some fun talking about that next. But before we get to that point, folks, do us a favor. Take 3 seconds of your time. See that thumbs up button right below us. Go ahead and click that for us. That really helps with the YouTube algorithm, helps promote our show, helps us kind of get to the point where more and more people are going to have access to seeing and seeing the promotions of our show. We would greatly appreciate that very, very much. Make sure you're notified to the channel. Make sure you've subscribed to the channel so you can hit the notification so you know when we're going live. But as always, the best way to support Irish Breakdown is to become a member at irishbreakdown.com. Got some new features that we're going to be rolling out here for the next few weeks. One of them is I'm offering offer analysis so when Notre Dame offers a player, I will do sort of an offer profile, break down some film, talk about the guy a little bit. I got to get caught up on some offers that happened in the week I was packing for vacation. I was on vacation, so I put a couple receiver profiles out today. I'll have a lot more coming up as I look to get caught up on some of the more recent offers. So just one of the many reasons it's great to be a member at the Irish Breakdown Premium channel, which is the Champions Lounge, and you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com.